A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armour of bronze, weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and servers." Then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah fighting against the Philistines." Early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd, loaded up and set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here, and with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can't I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it and struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armour on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around, because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield-bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
What a mammoth reading. That's just amazing. So much to give thanks to God for today. We've had fantastic time at us. Thank you so much for the musicians for teaching us so well. Okay, quick gospel reading, quick reading from Matthew. And this again is a story of trusting God over what seems impossible. So this is Matthew 14, 22 to 33. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up the mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves, because the wind was against it. During the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Okay, bear with me, will you? I'm quite warm. It's really not that exciting. Okay. So we've got this familiar story. Who doesn't know this story? Who's never heard it before? Good, that's a good start. Of course we know the story. One of the challenges of being on the rota and getting your readings is you either get totally obscure bits that you think, what on earth am I going to get from this? Or you get really familiar passages and you think, what on earth am I going to get from this? Because we all know the story. So we're going to explore this and just draw out a few things. First thing we need to remember, we're on this journey, aren't we, with these people who are enthusiastic for God and then turn their back on God, really into worshipping and praising God and then really into doing exactly what they want. Facing challenges, facing mountains, facing giants in this particular case. This is the ongoing battle. And it's got to a point where the battle lines are drawn, meaning there's one lot here, there's the other lot there facing them, and it's a total impasse. Nobody quite knows what to do. The battle lines are drawn, and everybody's waiting. Not helped by the fact that a couple of times a day, almost like clockwork, Goliath the giant comes forward and says, come on then. Come on then, Dave, take me on. Come on then, Dave. Come on then. No, I want to challenge Shirley. Come on, take me on. Taunting them, making them feel small, making them feel inadequate. These are the people of God. What has happened that they stand there, fearful and frightened, in the same way that Peter jumps out of the boat and suddenly, a moment later, thinks, what are we going to do? Oh. So, twice daily, Goliath comes out and taunts them. The Philistines are behaving in a way that is clearly a defiance of God's people and a defiance of God. They were heathen. So this wasn't just a territorial battle. This wasn't just about a bit of land. This was about belief. It was about faith. It was about who is in charge. And then we cut to David, this younger son, caring for the sheep and running around with bread and cheese, which Chris pointed out to me between the two services makes him a pizza delivery boy. So he's doing two jobs. Not only is he looking after the sheep, but he's doing a bit of delivery on the side. He's got one of those big Uber boxes behind him, dashing around delivering stuff. And he's there. He's the youngest of the family. There's three eldest sons whose names we know, and then there's another few brothers whose names we never find out, and the three older ones are in Saul's army, so he's taken on more responsibility. And he offers himself. King Saul is understandably unsure, but he hasn't got a plan B, or a plan C, or a plan B. He's put out that appeal. He said, come on, somebody fight, and you'll get all sorts of wonderful goodies if you defeat Goliath, but there was nobody there. So David refuses the armour, as we know, and then he stands in front of Goliath. A brave thing to do, to stand in front of the giant. And the giant is offended. You think, I'm a dog to have sticks thrown at me or thrown for me? Come on, put somebody up against me who is going to give me a proper fight. David tries to explain to Goliath. He carefully presents the reality of what is about to happen. David picks up a stone with his sling, slings it, and we know the rest. Don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Good. Giants. King Saul was a giant. We're told earlier on in 1 Samuel 9 verse 2, he was a young man without equal, a head taller than any of the others. But in this situation, he'd more than met his match. So, a few questions for you. First question, what are your giants? What are your giants? What are the things in life that you fear most? That seem unbeatable, that seem too big for you? Perhaps at the moment those members of PCC here are thinking, actually this deficit in our budget is a giant. I've been in this church 38 years, we've had these giants before. They have never won because God is bigger.
Amen.
Okay, 3 of us think so, that's a good start. We might get a few more later, you know. Seriously, we all have giants in our lives, don't we? Things that we fear, decisions we have to make, health issues, crises, things that can overwhelm us. And we're made of our experiences. If we've had tough times in the past, every giant becomes a bigger giant. If we've made bad decisions in the past, every decision becomes a giant. We're made of those experiences. Now, Goliath stands there, made of the experiences of being the giant, being the victor, being the strong one. David stands there, full of the experience of being a shepherd boy. And I picked a bit of bread. I'll never forget that one, Chris. And being humble, of being ordinary, and of being godly. And they both use their experience in this moment. We've had things happen to us in our lives that have made small things become giants. We all carry vulnerabilities, and we fear being overwhelmed. But in God, as in his perfect creation, made in his image, we are bigger than the giants. So what are your giants? We'll be praying about that later when we come to pray a bit later on. Second thing is, okay, you can put your hands up for this one. Who's ever met anybody important? Anybody famous? Yeah, a few of you. Okay. Yeah, okay, a few of you. Good. I wonder what makes us think those people are famous or important. What makes us think they're important? Second thing we can read from this passage is status doesn't matter. Status is, apparently, according to a dictionary, accepted or recognised official position, especially in a social group. Status in those times was about physical strength, height, and land. So obviously, King Saul had status because he was tall and he was king, he had a position, he had people who followed him, but Goliath was taller. Saul in his day was feared and powerful. Goliath was more feared and more powerful. Height, position, power, arrogance, wealth are all signs, then and now, of someone's status. But God sees things differently. God sees us as all equal in his sight. David proves that human judgments of status and power mean nothing. And for those of you who have at times or are now facing abuse by those with status or power, those who have the scars of having suffered under those with human status and power, need to step back and say, God sees things differently. Status doesn't matter in the kingdom of God. And as we see in this story, the little, unimportant, the young, inexperienced David defeats that power and that status of Goliath because he trusts in God. Because he trusts in God. Faith, trust in God is so much more important than status. Third question for you. What gifts or skills have you got? got? And none of you can answer that with none. What gifts or skills have you got? It's very easy, isn't it, to be jealous of others, to look at others and say, I wish I was like them. I wish I could play the guitar like Eden does. I do. I can't play the guitar at all. I'm rubbish. Absolutely appalling at playing the guitar. Or I wish I could do that, or I wish I could do this, or I wish I could do the other. It's very easy to slip into that. Other people are better than me. Other people are more gifted than me. And can I honestly say, as somebody who stands at the front quite a bit, please don't look at us and think we're brilliant. Because we fail just like everybody else does, and our gifts are this. You've got other gifts. Everybody's got gifts. We can bemoan what we're not. We're not rich necessarily, or we're not as talented as we might want to be, or we're not as young as we might want to be. Chris had a big birthday recently. He knows what that feels like now. Or we're not as attractive as we want to be, or we're not as popular as we want to be, or we're not famous, or I don't have a reputation that others have. But we have something that God has given us to use. And we need to focus on what those gifts are. Now, David was not a warrior. He couldn't wear the armour. He couldn't fight in the way that Goliath was expecting. He was good at looking after his sheep, protecting his sheep. Not necessarily the greatest gift of giant killing on the face of it. But he had a skill and he had a sling. And he made use of what he had. Perhaps it was the confidence of youth. Perhaps more likely it was the confidence and strength he had in God to see him through whatever. So easy to underestimate ourselves. So easy to do ourselves down. So easy to be ignorant of God's call on our lives. So easy to think we're not worthy. We're not good enough. But God says to each one of us this morning, you are worthy. You are powerful. You have gifts to use. So don't underestimate yourself. Use what you have. And a final question. And I don't want you to answer this one out loud. Just think for yourself, and we'll just have a moment of quiet as asking this question. In your life, in our world, in our church, in our communities, what do you doubt that God can do? What do you doubt that God can do? What seems to be an impossible giant? David believed it was possible. We need to believe it is possible. And that isn't wishful thinking. That isn't naive. If I think about it, I can do anything. That isn't Orville, for those who remember, saying, I wish I could fly. Yeah, some of you do. Okay. For the younger people here, don't worry about it. Ask an old person. It's not about that stupid, not theology or doctrine, but that attitude that goes around, on X Factor and stuff like that. If you just think about it and try hard enough, you can do it, because that's not the reality of life. But it is about believing with God, nothing is impossible. Here we have God's people, led, guided, fed, repeatedly forgiven, who feared Goliath and the Philistines. They'd lost their sense of believing that with God anything is possible. Even King Saul sees David as the last throw of the dice, the last opportunity. But David believed it was possible. It wasn't a miracle. It was simply somebody from a humble background using the gifts they had and believing that God was bigger than the giant standing in front of him. Believe it is possible, as David did. So 4 things to leave us with as we move into prayer and then into worship and song. 4 things to think about. Be bigger than our giants. Be bigger than our fears. Nothing can defeat God. Status doesn't matter. We need to make use of the gifts we have. And we do. All need to believe. It is possible. Because in God, nothing is impossible. Amen.
Amen.